Hello, hello. I'm Marinade. This is Boom Bust, and these are some of the stories that we're tracking for you today. First up, Germany rejected Greece's request for a loan extension, and unless Greece revises its offer before Friday's meeting, approval, that might be hard to find. I'll explain it all coming right up. Then Pippa Malmgren is on the show. The author and economist sat down with my colleague Edward Harrison to talk about Greece and Euroland. And in today's Big Deal, Ed and I are continuing the Greek conversation. You don't want to miss a moment, so let's get to it. Thursday, Germany rejected Greece's proposal for a 6-month extension to its Eurozone loan agreement. Germany said that the proposal was not a substantial solution because it didn't obligate Athens to stick to the conditions of its international bailout. Now, hours after receiving the proposal, Germany's finance minister, Wolfgang Schäuble, released a statement saying, quote, "The letter from Athens doesn't offer a substantial proposal for a solution. In reality, it aims for a bridging loan without meeting the terms of the bailout program." Now, as the biggest creditor and EU paymaster, Germany has the clout to block a deal which would leave Greece without any financial lifeline and potentially put it towards an exit from the Eurozone. Now, while officials in Brussels welcome the effort of the new Syriza party to find a workable formula, German officials said that the proposal was full of loopholes and expressed no commitment to the bailout terms. Now, Athens' latest proposal pledged that Greece would meet all of its financial obligations to its creditors, recognize the existing EU-IMF program as a legally binding framework, and refrain from unilateral action that would undermine the fiscal targets. Most importantly, it accepted that the extension would be monitored by the European Commission, ECB, and IMF, formerly known as the Troika. However, crucial details, they still need to be clarified on fiscal targets, labor market reforms, privatization, and a bunch of other measures, which are due to be implemented under the existing program. Dutch Finance Minister Jeroen Dijsselbloem, who leads the meetings of the Eurozone ministers, said that they would meet again on Friday in Brussels to discuss the situation. Greece has little more than a week before its €240 billion bailout expires at the end of February, leaving the government without financing and its banks at risk of being completely cut off from lending facilities of the ECB. I mean, let's just hope Germany is in a much more amicable mood come Friday afternoon. For insight on Greece and Europe, we were joined earlier by Dr. Pippa Malmgren. Now, Dr. Malmgren is the founder of DRPM Group and author of Signals, The Breakdown of the Social Contract and the Rise of Geopolitics. Now, Ed first asked her about the possibility of a Greek default and if ELA being pulled is a likely scenario. Take a look at what she had to say.
I think it's a real possibility, and I've argued this from the start of all the troubles with the Eurozone from 5 or 6 years ago, that the problem is that if the public don't feel that there's a reward for the pain, then eventually they'll hit their limit. Their tolerance will fade. And we're seeing this across Europe, not just in Greece, the rise of the far-right parties in Spain, in Germany. The AfD party in Germany, which is very anti-Euro, is gaining support very rapidly. And in that environment, sovereign interests can trump pre-existing agreements. And so in the markets, everybody says, well, there's no legal mechanism for them to leave. And the answer is, yes, there is. They just announced they're leaving. It's a sovereign power to do so.
Right. Now, if we do see a Grexit, there's going to be a flood of capital out of the periphery. We're talking Spain, Italy, Portugal, potentially also France. And, you know, that's going to make those banking systems unstable. Germany already has the lowest productivity growth in the EU at this point. So we could end up in a situation in which those countries are forced out of the euro, or at least one or two of them are forced out of the Eurozone, and we see a massive revaluation crushing the competitiveness in Germany. Is that something that is potentially going to happen?
So this is the domino theory of our generation, and I'm not sure that that will prove to be true. I think the market has already pretty much discounted that Greece might exit. They want the euro to survive because it would be so traumatic if it didn't. So people will buy the story that they'll have the resources necessary to defend the other larger countries. But I would take up your point about, will this hurt Germany, or would Germany really be damaged if for some reason we had a total catastrophe? And I think the leadership of companies in Germany have already concluded that they could survive a significant appreciation of the currency. In fact, throughout Germany's history, they've typically had a way overvalued currency, and that's one reason they don't compete on price. They compete on quality. And they've watched the example of the Swiss National Bank in recent weeks, where the value of the Swissy, as you know, went up by 43% in a single half hour after the announcement that they weren't going to keep the peg anymore. And the stock market only fell by like less than 10%. And so they're saying, you know, maybe it wouldn't be the end of the world. So I think we ought to consider the possibility that the Germans are saying, hey, what do we really have to lose if nobody's buying anything anyway in Germany, in Greece, in Spain, in Italy, and all the other peripheral countries?
Right, and they've already pivoted to Asia and outside of the Eurozone for their wares as well. Now, I'm going to take up something that you've talked about a lot. Now, we're having problems in the Eurozone, and that means that companies are not seeing their top line increase, but they still have to make money. So is shrinkflation a way for companies to be able to make money overcoming the decrease in the top line revenue growth?
Yeah, I think, look, to be clear, shrinkflation is when a company offers you something where the packaging is the same size it used to be, but what's inside is smaller and it's still the same old price. So basically, it's a way of protecting their margin. I don't think it's happening in the Eurozone so much, where the principal force at work is still deflation. But I think we see loads of examples of it in the United States and in the United Kingdom. And they're often everyday things. I mean, in recent weeks, there's been this marvelous story about Cadbury's Cream Eggs, which is a chocolate. And they announced they weren't putting 6 in the box anymore. They're putting in 5, and they're reducing the thickness of the coating on the outside, and the quality of the chocolate's being degraded. And, you know, people are outraged. But what it reflects is margin pressure. And so I think we should look for signs of shrinkflation as a precursor to inflationary pressures, particularly in the countries that are growing more strongly, so the United States and the United Kingdom especially.
Well, it's good that you mentioned the United Kingdom, because when you look at the UK trade data that came out just recently, it's pretty bad. And you're there in the UK. How is the government going to be able to spin the trade data on the eve of elections later on this year?
Yeah, I'm not sure they can do anything to make the trade data look better in the short term. But I have to say, what I see here on the ground is huge capital inflow into the United Kingdom, partly because there's so much instability in emerging markets. We got inflation about to hit 17% in Russia, 23% in Argentina. People are unsure about the situation with the economy in China. And so they're looking for, what is the best place to put my money? The UK has emerged as a very attractive tax haven for serious capital. And I have to say, manufacturing is moving from China and across emerging markets back to the UK, just as to the Midwest of the United States, very rapidly. So people want to invest in that. They're also wanting to buy into the education system here, which is very strong. And frankly, they just trust the fact that the currency has a picture of the Queen on it, and that implies a level of stability. And this year is the year we celebrate the anniversary of the Magna Carta, and, you know, that has value.
And, you know, it sounds to me very much like it's associated with your story about geopolitics there. When you look at markets that people want to invest in going forward, what markets stand out in terms of the turbulent world of geopolitics that we live in right now?
Well, in terms of investable markets, you know, I think we need to be a lot more granular. People ask me all the time, should I be in or out of emerging markets? And my question is, Well, first of all, which ones? And second of all, which sectors in each of those? Emerging markets that are very commodity dependent have a real problem right now because they've had more and more of the debt denominated in U.S. dollars. Now the dollar is strengthening. They're experiencing big devaluation. So suddenly the burden of the debt is expanding very rapidly just at the very moment that their income from commodities is falling. So that's a crush that's going to damage how the whole economy performs. On the other hand, there are economies like India that aren't commodity dependent, that actually can take advantage of such a situation. I feel a little better about them. Now, the reason that connects to geopolitics is because China and Russia, they feel that all these price movements are very much a function of the United States and the industrialized world choosing to basically manipulate markets through excessively low interest rates, quantitative easing. And so their view is this isn't just an economic policy problem. This is something that requires them to protect their population from adverse price movements, and therefore they're entitled to reach for assets. So China gets more aggressive in the South China Sea, where we find 10% of the world's fish supply. Russia's more aggressive about assets everywhere from the Arctic to Ukraine, which is the fourth largest food supplier in the world and the center of their gas pipelines, all the way to the Mediterranean and the Black Sea.
That was Dr. Pippa Malmgren, founder of DRPM Group and author of Signals, the breakdown of the social contract and the rise of geopolitics. Time for a break, but stick around because when we return, Steve Keen will be on the show. Steve and I are talking about Finance Minister of the moment. Yeah, you know who he is, Mr. Yanis Varoufakis. And in today's Big Deal, Edward Harris and I will continue the Hellenic Republic discussion. And remember, you can see all segments featured in today's show on YouTube at youtube.com/boombustrt and on Hulu at hulu.com/boom-bust. Now, as we head to break, here are some of your closing numbers of the bell. Come on back with us. I'm a fighter. I can take a punch. I live. I learn something every day. I strike when I need to strike.
Just like that.
I prepare. I've earned everything I have. If I fall, I get back up. I won't be underestimated. I'm Aaron Aid, and I put the boom into boom bust.
Here's what people have been saying about Redacted tonight.
Give it to us.
Redacted is full-on awesome.
Real?
The only show I go out of my way to watch every week. It really packs a punch. Lee Camp is the John Oliver of RT
You
America.
guys do have the same accent.
Hey, we are apparently better than boobs.
Nothing's better than boobs.
You see, people you've never heard of love Redacted tonight. The president of the World Bank, though, hates it.
Well, he doesn't really have any taste. I think he's
Seriously, he sent us an email.
So you visit the doctor for a routine checkup, and he tells you that you need immediate surgery. But I've been healthy my whole life, you say. No, he says, you must be feeling pain. And you say, but I don't feel any pain. Let's get you prepped, but scalpel, please. And you don't say a thing. You just take it. It's the same with news. You can just sit back and take that first opinion, or you can get a second opinion.
Welcome back to the show. Now, back on the show today is Steve Keen. Steve is the head of the School of Economics, History, and Politics at Kingston University, and he also pens a popular blog called Steve Keen's Debt Watch. Now, I first asked Steve if he thinks the new Greek finance minister, Mr. Yanis Varoufakis, is a radical, as some have made him out to be. Take a look at what he had to say.
No. Yanis, in economics, because economics is dominated by a mythical vision, which we call neoclassical economics, being radical is pointing out the emperor has no clothes. Yeah, that's the subtitle of my book, Debunking Economics. Yanis has written very similar treatises to mine on that front. And you're a radical when you criticise a delusion. So we're the little boys pointing up saying, Mum, the emperor's naked, he's not wearing anything. And that makes us classified as radical. The radical act is the emperor to be naked in the first place. And that's what unfortunately has happened here. We've let economics get taken over by a sector that doesn't really understand capitalism, has a mythical model of how it's a perfect world and perfect society, ends up causing crises like we're going through now, and then tries to unravel them after and actually makes them worse. Being a radical in economics is being sensible and pragmatic, and that is exactly what Yanis is being.
Now, you know, Yanis's proposal of linking GDP to repayments, you know, it makes it seem like Varoufakis recognizes that principal write-downs, they're non-starters for the Troika right now. But do you think we'll eventually see principal losses on Greek debt?
Well, that comes down to the politics. If they're forced out of the euro, then, of course, instantly that'll happen. Mm-hmm. I think it's feasible over time that if Syriza's policies succeed in helping Greece start to grow, then they'll carry on saying, OK, that worked, now let's try the next part of our program. Now, that is saying, well, yes, OK, maybe at some point they'll say they want to have some debt write-downs. Maybe they'll say they want to, certainly when they want to transfer 60% of the debt, which is the Maastricht limit, across to the ECB to back it, that they'll still pay it. That's one that they definitely want to do. We know that. They may come forward and saying debt reductions at some point, only once they prove the success of their program so far. So if they succeed, they may come to debt write-downs. But if they fail because of the Europeans not agreeing to the proposals they're putting forward and then forcing them out of the euro, it won't be their fault that the defaults occur.
Now, the situation in Greece is the worst peacetime economic performance by a developed economy since the Great Depression. And it seems like a textbook case of debt deflation in action. So is this how debt deflation takes hold?
Yeah, unfortunately, and this is again where being ignorant about the very possibility of a debt deflation has led to the problems. To mention one of the experts on the Great Depression, Ben Bernanke, ignored Irving Fisher's debt deflation arguments because he said debt deflation represents, and I quote, no more than a redistribution from one group, debtors, to another group, creditors, and therefore should have no significant macroeconomic effects. That's totally ignorant of the role in which of banks in creating money and destroying it when debt is repaid. So a debt deflation starts off with excessive debt, which leads to people reducing they're trying to pay their debts down, but as they pay their debts down, they are also eliminating money in the economy and causing the economy to spiral down as a result. And then in that situation, you have distress selling, as Fisher argued back in 1933, and the whole thing cascades on top of itself, the only destination being zero, unless there's a countervailing force acting in the opposite direction, which is what the New Deal was under Roosevelt, and what we should be doing now, which is running deficits from the government sector. That's what America's done, and people keep on thinking America's responsible, etc., etc. It is, but it's been responsible by running deficits that are 2 and 3 times the size of the deficits being run in Europe. And in fact, at the peak of the crisis in America, the government deficit there was 15% of GDP, which is 5 times the supposed limit allowed by the Maastricht Treaty. Now, that government spending enabled the private sector to delever without causing a spiral down in the amount of money in the economy. It's not perfect. I'd rather see debt get written off. But that is the only way to prevent a debt deflation, and the Europeans are doing exactly the opposite.
And what about the rest of the periphery? Are they out of the woods yet?
Well, peripheries include Spain, and absolutely not on that front. And of course, Spain is a far larger, I think it's about 5 or 6 times the size of Greece. It's one of Europe's largest economies. And it will be the next one in the firing line. Italy is also looking fragile. France unemployment is running at 12%. And that's, you know, Europe's second largest economy in the EU zone. So the fragility is quite widespread. Even Germany's not doing so well because Germany's success really relied upon people being able to buy its exports and maintain a trade surplus for it. So I think we're well and truly entering the woods, and it's the only way out, ultimately, is to directly address that excessive private debt and start writing it off, which is, of course, not even being talked about in this debate. We're talking totally about Greece's public debt. But those actions to reduce the level of private debt are about the only way out of the woods. Otherwise, we're going to spend a long time wandering around hoping we won't bump into Little Miss Riding Hood won't bump into the big bad wolf. But the big bad wolf of deflation is definitely out there in the European woods.
And if you had the political cover to fix these problems exactly as they should be dealt with, what would you do?
I would use the state's power to create money to do what people are now calling helicopter drop money. I call QE for the public, but it's linked that with the creation of the money by the government sector, putting money into people's deposit accounts, tie that to people who are in debt having to reduce their debt. So you use the government money creation capability to cancel private debt while still maintaining the same amount of money in the economy and while benefiting savers as well as debtors, because everybody would get the cash injection, and then write controls on the capacity of banks to lend to finance asset speculation, because that's really where the problem all began, by the banks creating far too much money to finance things like the subprime bubble and the dot-com bubble before that. So limit the capacity for banks to finance speculation, reduce the private debt that's outstanding, admit we made a mistake and cut it back by using the government's money creation capacity, and then after that we can reset ourselves and get back to something like 1950s and 60s America, where the vitality of that economy came partly from its patent generating and innovation and so on, but largely from the growth and demand that was coming out of rising private debt when it was rising from a very small level.
And where are your biggest concerns outside of Greece specifically? You mentioned some, but is it Italy, France, Portugal, where?
Well, Italy and France and Spain are the main concerns right now. But it'll go as far as even as Germany as well, because, as I've argued, even though I'm critical of the level of private debt we've got to, I see an increasing level of private debt as a natural part of a growing economy. That's what helps create a large amount of the money. So you need that demand generated by a rising level of private debt. Now, once you've got to the levels we're at right now, they're so high that nobody wants to borrow money, and that particular force of creative vitality in capitalism disappears, and we get locked in stagnation.
And that was Steve Keen, head of the School of Economics, History, and Politics at Kingston University. Time now for today's Big Deal. Big deal time, and today we're going to continue to talk about greasy Greece. It's time. I like your tie, by the way.
Thank you.
Nice pink tie. Now, Greek Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis has made his official request, and Germany has basically said, we're not into it, we don't like it, we know how that played out. Ed, I want to get your take on what went down. Why did this happen? Why did Germany say, nah-da-da-da-da? What do you think?
You know, actually, it's interesting. I have the document in front of me that was leaked to the press. It's like a document where it talks about a Trojan horse being the proposal by Greece was a Trojan horse. There were two or three things that stood out. They said the Greek letter is not clear at all, but opens immense room for interpretation. They also said that the three institutions should carefully examine the Greek current fiscal position, and that they needed a clear and convincing commitment that they were actually going to continue with the memorandum of understanding from the original agreement. So basically what they're saying is under all circumstances, we want you to do exactly, to commit to exactly what you had before, which Greece has already said that they're not going to do. So, you know, I just think that the position that the finance ministry in Germany has is a complete non-starter at this point in the negotiation.
So, Ed, is this Germany just completely, all the finance ministers saying no in Germany, or is this Schäuble going rogue? What's the story here? Do they all kind of get behind him? I
think that he's gone rogue because when we've heard from other finance ministers, first of all, there's Jeroen Dijsselbloem, who's the Eurogroup head, Dutch finance minister. He immediately said this was a basis for understanding and called the Eurogroup meeting for tomorrow.
Right.
We've heard voices out of Germany, including from the coalition government, that they find that this is a good basis for negotiation. So Schäuble, I think, has gone rogue, and we're going to see Germany come to the table. They're going to meet on Friday, and we'll just see what happens after that.
He just needs to chill out before Friday's meeting and come on, stop being a stick in the mud. You know, why specifically did the Germans reject this? You mentioned some points, but other than, you know, just not being completely rigid on do everything you said in the last agreement, or we're not gonna stick. What were some of the specifics within this new proposal that they didn't like?
I think that what they didn't like is the language, just generically speaking, making it seem like the Germans could, the Greeks could go against what they had to say. Here's something I think that's on the screen here. This is what the Greeks said. They said the government sent a letter to the Eurogroup seeking a 6-month extension of the loan agreement. Tomorrow's Eurogroup has only 2 choices, to accept or reject the Greek request. This will show who wants to find a solution and who doesn't. This was actually what the Greeks said to the Germans. So just moving forward from actually what the Germans were thinking.
Greece's position.
Exactly.
Basically.
They're saying that, oh, we don't care what you guys are saying. Look, we made this letter. This was in good faith. And you either just have to take it or leave it. And that's it at the end of the day.
And I think it's important to point out that, you know, this isn't completely unreasonable. Like they said, Syriza has their position, Greece has their position, but they are the paymasters. They're the biggest creditors. So I understand that they both have large chips here, but you have to, it's like a game of chicken. You know,
yeah.
And it's interesting to see who's gonna fold first. But I feel like, personally, I think Germany has more to lose. It seems like, you know, I know that sounds ridiculous, and everyone's gonna freak out at me for saying that. But you don't want a Grexit. We really don't want to see that. The entire eurozone could go tumbling after it. It seems like that's not an ideal situation, and I don't know if other members are going to start nudging Germany to get in line. What do you think?
Well, the way I look at it, you know, the Germans have a lot to lose because it's not just Greece. What they're thinking is that they can contain this and it will only be Greece.
Right,
but
exactly. That's what I mean. Like the first.
I think
chip
there
to
will
fall.
be others that will come along after the fact. So they need to get something in place. In terms of Greece, they do have a lot to lose, but in terms of the politics of Varoufakis and Tsipras, they've been given a mandate to do exactly what they do, what they're doing right now. In fact, the media were saying that they're not doing enough, that they capitulated, that they, have compromised. So in that sense, I think that, you know, the Germans need to move, and I think that they will on Friday and over the weekend.
So you think a deal can still get done? Something will come to
I think a
fruition
deal
here.
can get done, and it probably will get done. Pragmatically, that's the right thing to have happen because the uncertainty involved with having no deal is too great, and I don't think that the Germans want to risk that.
Let's hope not. Ed, great chatting about this as always, and we'll probably do it again soon. His drama isn't going anywhere anytime soon, but that's all for now. However, we love hearing from you, so please check out our Facebook page, facebook.com/BoomBustRT, and please tweet at us at AaronAid, at EdwardNH. From all of us here at BoomBust, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
We'll be right back.